I never thought the people who were supposed to love me most would be the ones to throw me out like garbage on a cold November night. But that's exactly what happened when my mother stood at the door of the house I'd sacrificed everything for, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I was no longer welcome. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how deep this betrayal cut. My name is Edna, and for 32 years, I believed family meant everything. I believed that if you worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, loved enough, you'd eventually earn the acceptance and respect you deserved. I was so desperately wrong. I grew up in a typical suburban neighborhood in Ohio, in a house on Maple Street that looked perfect from the outside. White picket fence, manicured lawn, the whole American dream package. But inside those walls, there was always a hierarchy I couldn't quite understand as a child. My younger brother David was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in my mother Eleanor's eyes. I was the one who had to prove myself, over and over again, never quite measuring up no matter how hard I tried. When I was 23, I married Richard. He seemed kind at first, stable, the type of man my mother approved of. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was too desperate for her validation to see it. We moved into a small apartment in Cleveland, and for a few years, things were okay. Not great, but okay. Then I got pregnant with my daughter Emily, and everything started to shift. Richard began staying out late, coming home smelling like cheap beer and cheaper perfume. He'd always have an excuse ready, always a reason why he needed just a little more money from our joint account. I made excuses for him because that's what I'd been trained to do my whole life. Make excuses, smooth things over, keep the peace at any cost. When Emily was 2, my father passed away suddenly. Heart attack, they said. 1 minute he was mowing the lawn, the next he was gone. At the funeral, my mother pulled me aside with tears in her eyes and asked if I would move back home to help her. She said she couldn't bear to be alone in that big house, that she needed family around her. David had just gotten a new job in Chicago and couldn't help, she explained. It had to be me. I should have said no. God, I should have said no. But when your mother looks at you with tears streaming down her face and tells you she needs you, what are you supposed to do? So Richard, Emily, and I packed up our little apartment and moved into the house on Maple Street. My childhood home became my prison, though I didn't realize it at the time. At first, Eleanor seemed grateful. She'd watch Emily while I worked my job as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. She'd have dinner ready when I got home. But slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, things began to change. The grateful smiles turned into criticisms. I wasn't raising Emily right. I wasn't contributing enough to the household expenses. I wasn't appreciating everything she was doing for us. Then David lost his job in Chicago. Within a week, he'd moved back home too, taking over the entire 3rd floor as his personal bachelor pad. And suddenly, I understood what my real role in this house was. I wasn't there to be supported or loved. I was there to be used. My mother expected me to pay for everything. Groceries, utilities, property taxes, repairs, everything. My entire paycheck disappeared into that house every month while David contributed nothing. When I tried to bring it up, Eleanor would get this cold look in her eyes and remind me that this was her house, her rules, and if I didn't like it, I could leave. But where would I go with a small child and a husband who could barely keep a job? Richard was no help. In fact, he sided with Eleanor on everything. I later learned why. He'd been gambling, racking up thousands of dollars in debt, and Eleanor had been paying off his creditors in exchange for his loyalty. She owned him. And by extension, she owned me. The years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and resentment. I worked 60-hour weeks, came home to clean, cook, and care for Emily while everyone else lounged around the living room watching television. David would order expensive takeout on my credit card and never pay me back. Richard would disappear for days at a time, and when he came back, he'd crawl into bed beside me smelling like someone else and act like nothing was wrong. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through the motions, too tired to fight, too beaten down to hope for anything better. Emily was the only light in my darkness. Every morning, I'd wake her up for school, help her get dressed, and tell her how much I loved her. She was 7 years old by then, bright and beautiful, with her father's dark hair and my green eyes. She was the only thing that kept me going. But children see more than we give them credit for. Emily saw how her grandmother favored Uncle David, how her grandmother spoke to me with contempt dripping from every word. She saw how her father ignored both of us, lost in his own selfish world. And she started to withdraw, becoming quieter, more anxious. That broke my heart more than anything else they did to me. I tried to change things. I really did. I sat Eleanor down one Sunday morning and told her we needed to have a family meeting about finances and responsibilities. She agreed, seeming almost pleased. But when the meeting happened, it became an ambush. Richard and David sat on either side of Eleanor on the living room couch like bodyguards, while I sat alone in the chair across from them. Eleanor did most of the talking. She said I was ungrateful, that I was taking advantage of her generosity, that I was setting a bad example for Emily with my constant complaining. David chimed in, saying I'd always been difficult, always been jealous of him. And Richard, my own husband, sat there nodding along like a puppet, refusing to meet my eyes. I felt something crack inside me that day, but I still didn't have the strength to leave. Where would I go? How would I support Emily on my own? So I swallowed my pride once again, apologized for things I hadn't done, and went back to my role as the family workhorse. The final straw came 6 months later, on a cold Tuesday evening in November. I'd been working on a major case at the law firm, pulling late nights all week. I was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, but I'd promised Emily I'd make her favorite dinner that night, spaghetti and meatballs with garlic bread. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, using the last bit of money in my checking account to buy the ingredients. When I got home, the house was dark, except for the glow of the television in the living room. I could hear David laughing at something on the screen. I went to the kitchen and started cooking, my hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. Brown the meat, add the sauce, boil the water. Emily came down and sat at the kitchen table, telling me about her day at school. She'd gotten an A on her math test. I told her how proud I was, fighting back tears because I was so tired and so proud and so trapped. The doorbell rang just as I was draining the pasta. I called for someone else to get it, but no one moved. The doorbell rang again, more insistently. Sighing, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. When I opened the door, Eleanor was standing there with a suitcase in each hand. Behind her, I could see a taxi idling at the curb. My heart started racing before my brain could fully process what I was seeing. "Mother," I said, confused. "Where are you going?" She looked at me with the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. "I'm not going anywhere, Edna. You are." David appeared behind her, arms crossed over his chest, that smug smile I'd grown to hate plastered across his face. Eleanor pushed past me into the house, David following. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind refusing to accept what was happening. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say. My voice sounded strange, high-pitched and frightened. Eleanor set the suitcases down in the foyer with 2 heavy thuds. "We've decided you're no longer welcome in this house. Your things are packed. It's time for you to go." The world seemed to tilt sideways. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of sick joke. But Eleanor's face was stone, and David was actually smirking at my shock. "You can't be serious," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I live here. Emily lives here. This is our home. This is my house," Eleanor said, each word sharp as a knife. "I decide who stays and who goes, and I've decided you need to leave. You've been nothing but a burden, Edna, always complaining, always playing the victim. I'm tired of it. We're all tired of it." I felt like I'd been slapped. A burden? After everything I'd done, all the money I'd poured into this house, all the sacrifices I'd made, she was calling me a burden? "I've paid for everything," I said, my shock giving way to anger. "I've supported this entire household for years. You can't just throw me out." David laughed, actually laughed. "Come on, sis. You've always been so dramatic. Mom's been generous letting you stay here, rent-free. You should be grateful." "Rent-free?" The words exploded out of me. "I've paid every single bill for this house. I've bought all the groceries, paid the property taxes, covered the repairs. I've given you everything." "That's enough," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through my protests. "Richard has already signed the divorce papers. He agrees this is for the best. You're too unstable to be around Emily." The mention of my daughter made my blood run cold. "Where is Richard?" I demanded. "He's not here," Eleanor said dismissively. "He didn't want to deal with your hysterics. He signed over custody of Emily to me temporarily until we can sort out a more permanent arrangement." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "What? No, he can't do that. Emily is my daughter, and she'll be much better off without your constant negativity around her," Eleanor said. "Now, I've called you a cab. It should be here any minute. I suggest you take your things and go quietly." I looked past her to where Emily stood in the kitchen doorway, her little face white with confusion and fear. The pot of spaghetti was still steaming on the stove behind her. I'd promised her dinner. I'd promised her we'd be okay. "Emily," I called out, starting toward her, but David stepped in front of me. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, and there was a warning in his voice that made my skin crawl. Another car pulled up outside. The cab, I realized. This was really happening. They were really throwing me out. "I need to talk to my daughter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to explain this to her." Eleanor's face softened, but only slightly. "You can write her a letter, but you need to leave now, Edna. This is my house, and I want you out of it." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her, not in front of David. I pushed past them both and went to Emily, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. "Baby," I said softly, and now the tears did come, streaming down my face. "I have to go away for a little while, but I promise you, I will come back for you. I will never abandon you. Do you understand?" Emily wrapped her arms around my neck, sobbing. "Don't go, Mommy. Please don't leave me here." I held her as tight as I dared, memorizing the feel of her, the smell of her strawberry shampoo. "I love you so much," I whispered into her hair. "More than anything in this world. You remember that, okay? No matter what anyone tells you, you remember that your mommy loves you." "Time's up," David said, and I felt his hand on my shoulder, pulling me away from my daughter. I stood up, my legs shaking. I looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, and saw nothing but cold satisfaction in her eyes. She'd won. She'd finally gotten rid of the disappointment daughter and claimed the golden boy and the sweet granddaughter for herself. "You'll regret this," I heard myself say. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, from a part of myself I didn't know existed. "You'll regret what you've done to me." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. "I gave everything to this family. Everything. And you threw it away like garbage. One day, you're going to understand what you've lost." I grabbed the 2 suitcases, took one last look at Emily's tear-stained face, and walked out the door. The cab driver helped me load the luggage into the trunk. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the house one final time. The lights were warm and inviting in the windows. From the outside, it still looked like the perfect American home, but I knew the truth now. I knew what kind of rot lived behind that white picket fence. The cab driver asked me where I wanted to go, and I realized I had nowhere. No family, no friends I'd been able to maintain while working myself to death for people who despised me. I told him to take me to a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask too many questions. That night, lying on scratchy sheets in a room that smelled like cigarette smoke and defeat, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to crawl back and apologize for existing. Instead, I was going to do something I'd never done before in my entire life. I was going to fight back. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I used the last of my credit to rent a small studio apartment in a neighborhood I never would have considered before. A place where sirens wailed through the night and you had to buzz yourself through 2 locked doors to reach your unit. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one could take it away from me. I went to work that Monday with my head held high, even though I could barely afford to eat. I threw myself into my job with a renewed focus, working harder than I ever had before. I needed to prove to myself that I was valuable, that I was worthy, that I wasn't the burden Eleanor had said I was, but proving it to myself wasn't enough. I needed to get Emily back, and that meant I needed help. Legal help, the kind of help I couldn't afford. 3 weeks after Eleanor threw me out, Emily got sick. I found out because Richard finally called me, his voice panicked and guilty. Eleanor had taken Emily to the emergency room with a high fever and severe dehydration. They were keeping her overnight for observation. I was at the hospital within 20 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I got to Emily's room, Eleanor was sitting beside the bed, holding Emily's hand. She looked up when I walked in, and her expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly. "She's my daughter," I said, moving to the other side of the bed. Emily was asleep, her face flushed with fever, an IV in her tiny arm. She looked so small and vulnerable that I wanted to scoop her up and run. "The doctor says she'll be fine," Eleanor said. "You can leave now." "I'm not going anywhere," I told her, and I meant it. I stayed all night, holding Emily's other hand, refusing to leave even when Eleanor called security. The nurse on duty, a kind woman named Maria, saw what was happening and convinced security that I had every right to be there. Eleanor eventually left in a huff, and for one night, I had my daughter back. Emily woke up around 3 in the morning. When she saw me, she started crying. "Mommy," she whispered, "I thought you didn't want me anymore." Those words broke something in me. I climbed into the hospital bed beside her, careful of her IV, and held her while she cried. I explained, as best I could to a 7-year-old, that I would never stop wanting her, that I would never stop fighting for her. In the morning, Emily was discharged. Eleanor arrived to pick her up, Richard trailing behind her like a guilty shadow. When they tried to take Emily, she clung to me, refusing to let go. It took 3 nurses to separate us, and the sound of Emily screaming for me echoed through the hospital corridors long after they'd carried her away. I stood in that hospital hallway, watching them disappear through the automatic doors, and felt something shift inside me. The grief and pain crystallized into something harder, sharper, anger. Pure, righteous anger. That's when I met Jake. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, trying to compose myself before heading back to work, when a young man in a slightly rumpled suit sat down across from me. He introduced himself as Jake Morrison, a lawyer with Legal Aid of Ohio. He'd been at the hospital visiting another client and had witnessed the scene in Emily's room. "I heard what happened," he said gently, "and I think I can help you." I looked at him skeptically. "I can't afford a lawyer," I said bluntly. "I can barely afford to eat." "That's what legal aid is for," he explained. "We help people who can't afford traditional legal representation, and from what I saw this morning, you need help." Something in his earnest expression made me trust him. So I told him everything. About Eleanor, about David, about Richard's gambling debts, and Eleanor's financial manipulation. About the years of abuse and the final betrayal. I told him about Emily, about how I'd been caring for her alone while paying for everything, and how Eleanor had somehow convinced Richard to give her custody. Jake listened to all of it, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the words that changed everything. I think your mother and brother committed fraud, possibly several kinds of fraud, and I think we can prove it. Over the next few weeks, Jake became my lifeline. He worked tirelessly, digging through public records, interviewing neighbors, tracking down financial documents. He discovered that Eleanor had been forging Richard's signature on various legal documents for months, including the custody agreement. He found evidence that she and David had been systematically stealing from the estate my father left behind, money that should have been split between David and me. He also discovered something even more damning. Eleanor was planning to host a major charity gala at the house, a fundraiser for a fake nonprofit organization she'd created. She was using my father's good name and reputation to solicit donations from wealthy donors, donations that would go straight into her and David's pockets. The gala was scheduled for December 20th, just a few weeks away. Jake looked at me across his cluttered desk at the legal aid office and said, "This is our chance. We can expose her publicly, in front of all those donors, in front of the whole community. But we need to be smart about it. We need to be absolutely certain of our evidence." We worked day and night, building our case. Jake filed for emergency custody hearings, arguing that Emily was in an unsafe environment. He contacted some of Eleanor's previous business partners, people she'd cheated or manipulated over the years. Many of them were willing to testify. He even managed to get Richard to talk, threatening him with charges of fraud and child abandonment if he didn't cooperate. Richard broke easily. He admitted that Eleanor had been paying off his gambling debts in exchange for his loyalty, that she'd threatened to turn him over to his creditors if he didn't sign the divorce papers and give her custody of Emily. He admitted that he'd been too weak and too scared to stand up for me or our daughter. His confession was recorded, notarized, and added to our evidence file. As we built our case, I felt myself changing. The timid, beaten-down woman who'd been thrown out into the cold was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who knew her worth and wouldn't accept anything less than what she deserved. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped making excuses for people who'd never deserved them. I became the person I should have been all along. The night before the gala, Jake and I met one final time to review our strategy. We had everything we needed: financial records showing years of fraud, witness testimonies, Richard's confession, evidence of Eleanor's fake charity. It was all there, documented and irrefutable. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked me. "Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought about Emily, about the terrified look on her face when they dragged her away from me at the hospital. I thought about all the years I'd wasted trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I thought about the person I'd been and the person I'd become. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's take her down." The night of the gala, I stood outside the house on Maple Street for the first time since Eleanor had thrown me out. The property was transformed. White lights twinkled in the trees. A red carpet led up to the front door. A valet station had been set up at the curb. Through the windows, I could see people in evening gowns and tuxedos, champagne flutes in hand, laughing and socializing. I was wearing a dress I'd bought at a thrift store, simple but elegant, black with a high neckline. I'd styled my hair and put on makeup for the first time in months. I looked like I belonged at this party, even though every fiber of my being wanted to run. Jake stood beside me, looking official in his best suit. Behind us were 3 of Eleanor's former business associates, all of them eager to see her exposed. We also had a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, a woman Jake had convinced to cover what he called a major charity fraud story. "Remember," Jake said quietly, "stay calm. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't let her provoke you." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Let's go." We walked up the red carpet like we'd been invited. The security guard at the door checked the guest list, confused, but Jake produced the legal documents showing that I was still technically a resident of the house, that I'd never been legally evicted. Reluctantly, the guard let us pass. The moment I stepped into that house, heads turned. I saw recognition flash across faces, followed by confusion. What was Eleanor's daughter doing here? Wasn't there some family drama? The whispers started immediately. Eleanor was holding court in the living room, David at her side, both of them dressed to the nines. She was laughing at something one of the donors had said, her hand on his arm in that charming way she had. Then she saw me. The color drained from her face. Then it came roaring back, bright red with fury. She crossed the room toward me, David close behind. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, low enough that the nearby guests couldn't hear. "Get out of my house immediately, or I'll call the police." "This is still technically my house too," I said calmly. "I never signed any papers giving up my residency rights." "But don't worry, Eleanor. I'm not here to crash your party. I'm here to tell these nice people the truth about your charity. Her eyes narrowed. You don't know what you're talking about. You're disturbed, Edna. Everyone knows you're unstable. Jake stepped forward, pulling out his badge from legal aid. Actually, Mrs. Winters, we have substantial evidence of charity fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. I've notified the Ohio Attorney General's office, and they're very interested in what we found. Eleanor's face went from red to white in an instant. David grabbed her arm, his earlier smugness replaced with panic. Mom, he whispered urgently. What is she talking about? I turned to address the room full of donors, my voice loud and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but I think you all deserve to know the truth before you write any checks. The charity you're being asked to donate to doesn't exist. My mother, Eleanor Winters, created it to funnel money into her own accounts. She's using my late father's reputation to commit fraud. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Eleanor tried to speak, but Jake cut her off. We have bank records, incorporation documents, everything we need to prove it, and that's just the beginning. Mrs. Winters has also been systematically stealing from her late husband's estate, forging legal documents, and using emotional manipulation and financial coercion to control her family members. He nodded to one of the former business associates, a woman named Margaret who'd lost $50,000 in a bad deal with Eleanor 5 years ago. Margaret stepped forward and told her story. Then another stepped forward. And another. One by one, they outlined Eleanor's pattern of manipulation and theft. Eleanor tried to defend herself, sputtering excuses and accusations, but her voice was drowned out by the mounting evidence against her. David tried to slip away, but Jake had positioned someone at the door. He wasn't going anywhere. The police arrived 15 minutes later, responding to Jake's earlier call. Detective Morrison had been briefed on the entire situation. She walked straight up to Eleanor and asked her to step outside. As Eleanor was being led away, she turned back to look at me one last time. The hatred in her eyes should have scared me. Instead, it made me feel powerful. I'd spent my whole life afraid of that look, afraid of her disapproval. Now I realized it meant nothing. She had no power over me anymore. David was arrested too, charged as an accessory to fraud. He tried to argue that he didn't know what Eleanor was doing, but the evidence showed otherwise. He'd been signing documents, accepting payments, actively participating in the schemes. His golden boy image crumbled in real time. After the police left with Eleanor and David in handcuffs, the guests began to file out, stunned and uncomfortable. The reporters stayed behind, interviewing Jake and some of the witnesses. This was going to be front-page news, and Eleanor's reputation was destroyed forever. Richard appeared from wherever he'd been hiding. He looked terrible, his face haggard and guilty. Edna, he started, but I held up my hand. Don't, I said. Just tell me where Emily is. Upstairs, he said quietly. In her room. Eleanor hired someone to watch her during the party. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I ran up the stairs, my heels clattering on the hardwood, and burst into Emily's room. She was sitting on her bed, reading a book, looking confused and worried. When she saw me, her face lit up. Mommy! She launched herself into my arms, and I held her so tight I was afraid I might hurt her. But I couldn't let go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I'm taking you home, baby, I whispered into her hair. We're leaving here, and we're never coming back. Over the next few weeks, everything fell into place faster than I could have imagined. Eleanor and David were formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft, and forgery. Richard, in exchange for his testimony, received probation and mandatory counseling. He also signed over full custody of Emily to me without a fight. The estate was sorted out, and it turned out my father had left me far more than I'd ever known. Eleanor had been hiding assets, claiming they'd been lost in bad investments. When everything was properly divided, I received enough money to buy a small house in a good school district, set up a college fund for Emily, and still have a comfortable cushion for emergencies. The house on Maple Street was sold to cover Eleanor's legal fees and pay back some of her victims. She and David both ended up serving prison time, though not as much as I would have liked. But their reputations were destroyed. The community that had once admired Eleanor now viewed her with contempt and disgust. As for me, I quit my job at the law firm and went back to school. I'd always wanted to be a teacher, but I'd given up that dream when I married Richard. Now, with Emily by my side and a future that was actually mine, I enrolled in an education program at the local community college. Jake and I stayed in touch. He'd become more than just my lawyer. He'd become a true friend. He came to Emily's 8th birthday party, bringing a huge teddy bear and a grin. He helped me move into our new house, assembling furniture and hanging pictures. Slowly, carefully, something more than friendship began to develop between us. I wasn't ready for a relationship, not yet. I had too much healing to do, too much rebuilding. But knowing he was there, patient and kind and willing to wait, gave me hope for the future. Maybe someday I could learn to trust again. Maybe someday I could open my heart without fear of it being crushed. Emily thrived in our new life. She made friends at her new school. She joined the school choir and discovered she had a beautiful singing voice. The anxiety that had haunted her in Eleanor's house faded away, replaced by the confidence and joy of a child who knew she was loved and safe. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and think about everything that had happened. I'd remember the woman I used to be, the one who believed she had to earn love through sacrifice and submission. I'd remember the night Eleanor threw me out, how small and worthless I'd felt standing on that street corner with nowhere to go. And then I'd think about who I'd become. The woman who'd fought back, the woman who'd gathered evidence and allies and refused to stay down. The woman who'd stood in front of a room full of strangers and exposed the truth, no matter how painful it was. I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade it away. Because that pain had transformed me. It had burned away all the parts of me that were weak and desperate and afraid, leaving behind something stronger and truer. 6 months after the gala, I attended Eleanor's sentencing hearing. I'd written a victim impact statement, and the judge allowed me to read it in court. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table, looking small and old in her orange jumpsuit. Nothing like the imposing figure who'd terrorized me for so many years. I stood at the podium and looked at her as I read my statement. I told the court about the years of abuse, the financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation. I told them about Emily, about how Eleanor had weaponized my own daughter against me. I told them about the night I was thrown out and the long journey back to reclaiming my life. When I finished, there were tears in my eyes. But they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of letting go of all the poison I'd been carrying. I looked at Eleanor one last time and said, "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The judge sentenced Eleanor to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2. David got 3 years. It wasn't enough. Not really. But it was something. As I left the courthouse that day, Emily's hand in mine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of trying to earn Eleanor's love, of living up to impossible expectations, of making myself small so others could feel big, it was all gone. I was free. Jake was waiting for us outside, leaning against his car with that easy smile I'd come to love. He'd brought lunch, planning to take us to the park for a picnic. Emily ran ahead, chattering excitedly about the ducks she wanted to feed. "You okay?" Jake asked me quietly, his hand gentle on my lower back. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. We drove to the park, the 3 of us, and spread out a blanket under a big oak tree. Emily ran off to play on the swings while Jake and I sat in comfortable silence, watching her. The sun was warm, the sky was blue, and everything felt possible. "This is what I almost gave up," I said to Jake. "This moment, this peace, this joy. I almost let them take it all away." "But you didn't," he reminded me. "You fought back. You won." He was right. I had won. Not just in the legal sense, though that was certainly satisfying. I'd won something far more important. I'd won myself back. The months that followed were filled with small victories and quiet moments of happiness. I graduated from my teaching program at the top of my class. I got a job teaching 3rd grade at Emily's school, which meant we could ride to work together every morning, singing along to the radio and making silly jokes. Jake and I officially started dating, taking things slow and steady. He met Emily's friends' parents at school events. He came to my college graduation ceremony, cheering louder than anyone when I walked across the stage. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, content to let our relationship develop at its own pace. I made new friends, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could do for them. I joined a book club at the local library. I started taking yoga classes on Saturday mornings. I learned to play the guitar, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was too busy sacrificing myself for people who didn't appreciate it. Emily and I created new traditions, just the 2 of us. Friday night movie nights with homemade popcorn, Sunday morning pancake breakfasts where she got to choose the mix-ins. Weekly trips to the library where we'd both check out huge stacks of books and spend the week reading them together before bed. I also made sure Emily understood what had happened, in age-appropriate terms. I never badmouthed Eleanor or Richard to her, but I also didn't lie about why we'd left. I explained that sometimes people make bad choices, and those choices have consequences. I told her that what had happened wasn't her fault, and it wasn't my fault either. Some people just aren't capable of loving others in a healthy way. Emily was resilient, more than I ever could have hoped. She had bad days, moments when she missed her grandmother or felt confused about why things had changed so drastically. But she also flourished in our new life, growing more confident and happy with each passing month. Richard remained on the periphery of our lives. He had supervised visitation rights, which he used sporadically at best. Sometimes he'd show up for his scheduled time with Emily, bringing cheap toys and empty promises. Other times, he'd cancel at the last minute, leaving Emily disappointed but increasingly unsurprised. I never spoke badly of him to her, but I also stopped making excuses for him. Emily deserved to see people as they truly were, not as we wished they could be. One year after the night Eleanor threw me out, I stood in the living room of our little house and looked around at what we'd built. The furniture was mismatched, bought secondhand or on sale, but every piece had been chosen with care. Photos of Emily and me covered the walls, capturing moments of genuine happiness. The kitchen was small but functional, and it smelled like the chocolate chip cookies we'd baked that afternoon. This was home, real home, in a way that house on Maple Street had never been. Emily came running in from her bedroom, holding a drawing she'd made at school. It was a picture of our family, she said, showing me the 3 stick figures she'd drawn. One was labeled Mommy, one was Emily, and the third was labeled Jake. She'd drawn hearts around all 3 of us. That's beautiful, baby, I said, my throat tight with emotion. Can I hang it on the fridge? She nodded enthusiastically and skipped back to her room to work on her homework. I stood there holding that drawing, marveling at how far we'd come. A year ago, I'd been homeless, broken, convinced I was worthless. Now I had a home, a career, a daughter who was thriving, and the possibility of love with a good man who saw my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. I heard from Eleanor only once during her time in prison. She sent a letter, which arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page, her handwriting still perfect despite the circumstances. The letter wasn't an apology. Eleanor wasn't capable of that kind of vulnerability. Instead, it was full of justifications and excuses. She wrote about how difficult her life had been, how my father had never appreciated her, how David needed more support than I did because he was sensitive. She wrote about how I'd always been difficult, always ungrateful, always causing problems, even from prison, even after everything. She couldn't take responsibility for what she'd done. I read the letter once, then I burned it in the kitchen sink and washed the ashes down the drain. I didn't need her justifications or her excuses. I didn't need anything from her anymore. Jake came over that evening for dinner, as he often did. He'd become part of our routine, part of our family in all the ways that mattered. He helped Emily with her math homework while I finished cooking. He set the table without being asked. He told terrible dad jokes that made Emily groan and giggle in equal measure. After dinner, after Emily had gone to bed, Jake and I sat on the back porch drinking tea and watching the stars. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers warm and solid. I got the job offer in Columbus, he said quietly. The one with the nonprofit legal advocacy group. I felt a spike of panic in my chest. Columbus was 3 hours away. I'd known he'd applied for the position, that it was an incredible opportunity for him, but I'd been trying not to think about what it would mean if he got it. That's wonderful, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You've worked so hard for this. He was quiet for a moment. Come with me, he said. You and Emily. We could start over together. There are great schools in Columbus, and I know you could get a teaching position there. We could get a place together, take the next step. My first instinct was to panic, to say no, to protect myself from the possibility of being hurt again. But then I looked at Jake, really looked at him, at his kind eyes and his patient smile, at the man who'd fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, who'd never asked for anything in return, who'd waited while I healed and rebuilt myself piece by piece. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. I need to talk to Emily, make sure she's okay with leaving. He squeezed my hand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere without your answer. I talked to Emily about it the next morning over breakfast. I expected her to be upset about the idea of moving, leaving her school and her friends. But she surprised me, the way children often do. Will Jake live with us? She asked, pushing her cereal around her bowl. If we go, yes, I said. We'd all live together. How do you feel about that? She thought about it for a long moment. I like Jake, she said finally. He makes you smile. You didn't smile much before, at Grandma's house. I like it when you smile, out of the mouths of babes. My 7-year-old daughter had seen what I'd been too caught up in survival to notice. I hadn't smiled much in those dark years. I'd forgotten how. Would you be okay with moving to a new city? I asked. Starting at a new school? She shrugged. Can I still bring my stuffed animals? I laughed, feeling tears prick my eyes. Of course you can bring your stuffed animals. Then it's okay, she said simply, and went back to eating her cereal like we'd just discussed what to have for dinner. Not a life-changing decision. That evening I called Jake and told him yes. We'd come to Columbus. We'd build a new life together, the 3 of us. His joy was palpable through the phone, and I felt answering joy blooming in my own chest. For the first time in my life, I was choosing happiness. I was choosing love. Real love, the kind that didn't demand sacrifice and submission. The kind that celebrated who I was rather than trying to make me smaller. We moved to Columbus that summer. Jake found us a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood full of families. Emily started 3rd grade at a school with an excellent arts program. I got a teaching position at the same school, teaching 2nd grade. We became a family not through blood or legal obligation, but through choice and love and daily commitment. Jake proposed on the anniversary of the night Eleanor threw me out. We were at the park where we'd had our first picnic, the three of us. Emily was in on the plan, barely able to contain her excitement. When Jake got down on one knee and pulled out a simple, beautiful ring, I said yes through happy tears. We got married the following spring in a small ceremony at the courthouse, with just a few close friends present. Emily was my maid of honor, wearing a purple dress she'd picked out herself. Jake's colleague from legal aid performed the ceremony. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding I'd had with Richard all those years ago. It was better. It was real. Eleanor was released from prison after serving 2 years. I heard about it through Richard, who called to let me know. He said she'd asked about Emily, wanted to know if she could see her granddaughter. I told him no. Emily had thrived without Eleanor's toxic presence in her life, and I wasn't going to expose her to that again. Richard didn't argue. I think even he understood that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. David got out 6 months later. He sent me a friend request on social media, which I declined. A few weeks after that, I heard through old neighborhood connections that he was living with Eleanor again, the two of them trying to rebuild some semblance of their former life. I felt nothing when I heard that news. No anger, no satisfaction, nothing. They'd become irrelevant to my life, and that was the greatest victory of all. My teaching career flourished. I loved working with young children, helping them discover the joy of learning. I saw myself in some of my students, the ones who tried too hard to please, who apologized for taking up space. I made it my mission to help them understand their worth, to teach them that they didn't have to earn love or acceptance. They were valuable simply because they existed. Emily grew into a confident, kind young woman. She excelled in school, made friends easily, and developed a passion for singing and theater. She called Jake Dad without any prompting from us, just naturally, because that's what he'd become to her. When she was 12, Jake officially adopted her. We all cried at the courthouse, happy tears this time. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and Jake was asleep beside me, I'd think about the woman I used to be. The one who'd stood on that street corner with 2 suitcases, homeless and broken, convinced she had nothing left. I'd think about how far I'd come, how much I'd survived, how thoroughly I'd transformed. The scars were still there. I still had moments of doubt, times when I'd catch myself falling into old patterns of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. But now I recognize those moments for what they were, echoes of old trauma rather than truth. And I had Jake to gently remind me of my worth, and Emily to show me what unconditional love looked like, and a life I'd built from scratch to prove that I was capable of so much more than I'd ever been allowed to believe. 5 years after leaving that house on Maple Street, I was invited to speak at a conference for survivors of family abuse. I almost said no. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and telling my story terrified me. But then I thought about all the women and men out there who were where I'd been, trapped in toxic relationships, convinced they had no way out. If my story could help even one person find the courage to leave, it would be worth the discomfort. I stood on that stage and told them everything. About Eleanor's manipulation, about years of financial exploitation, about the night I was thrown out. I told them about the rage and despair I'd felt, and about the decision to fight back instead of giving up. I told them about building the case, about exposing Eleanor at the Gala, about the long process of healing and rebuilding. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon the entire audience was on their feet. I saw tears on many faces, and I understood. They saw themselves in my story. They saw hope that they could survive too. Afterward, dozens of people came up to talk to me. They shared their own stories, their own struggles. A woman around my age told me her mother had been draining her bank account for years, and hearing my story had given her the courage to finally say no. A young man told me about escaping his abusive father's control and trying to rebuild his life. An older woman told me she'd cut off her toxic adult children and was learning to live without guilt. I listened to all of them, and I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. My pain hadn't been meaningless. It had shaped me into someone who could help others, who could light the way for people still lost in the darkness I'd escaped. I started writing a book about my experience, working on it in the early mornings before school and on weekends. It wasn't easy, reliving those painful memories, but it was cathartic too. I wrote about the warning signs I'd missed, the patterns of abuse, the slow erosion of self-worth. I wrote about the moment everything changed, and about the long road to recovery. I wrote about the importance of therapy, of building a support system, of learning to set boundaries and honor your own needs. The book was published 2 years later. It didn't become a bestseller, but it found its audience. I received letters and emails from readers all over the country, people who told me my story had changed their lives. Some had left abusive relationships after reading it. Others had reconciled with the past and found peace. A few had reconnected with family members they'd cut off, working to build healthier relationships. Emily read the book when she was 15. I'd been nervous about that, worried about how she'd react to seeing the full truth of what we'd been through. But she came to me after finishing it with tears in her eyes and hugged me tight. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom," she whispered. "Thank you for fighting for us." Jake framed the first review of my book, a glowing write-up from a major newspaper, and hung it in his office. He was so proud of me, so supportive of everything I did. Our marriage was nothing like my first one. We were partners, equals, supporting each other's dreams and weathering life storms together. We had a second child, a son we named Daniel, when I was 40. Emily was thrilled to be a big sister, doting on the baby with fierce protectiveness. Watching her with Daniel, seeing the love and care she showed him, I knew I'd broken the cycle. She would never treat her children the way Eleanor had treated me. The toxic legacy ended with my generation. Now, as I sit here writing this, I'm 45 years old. Emily is 20, studying musical theater at a prestigious arts college. Daniel is 5, starting kindergarten in the fall. Jake and I have been married for 13 years, and I love him more now than I did on our wedding day. We've built a life that's messy and beautiful and completely ours. I never saw Eleanor again after she got out of prison. I heard she passed away 3 years ago. Eleanor's death came unexpectedly on a cold January morning. Richard called to tell me, his voice shaky and uncertain, as if he wasn't sure whether I'd want to know. I thanked him for letting me know and hung up without any fanfare. I felt a strange sort of nothing when I heard the news. Not relief, not sadness, just an acknowledgement that a chapter of my life had finally, officially closed. I didn't attend the funeral. Emily asked if we should go, out of some sense of familial obligation, but I told her we didn't owe Eleanor anything, not even our presence at her goodbye. David sent me an email afterward, rambling and somewhat bitter, complaining about how few people had shown up, how the community had never forgiven her. He seemed to be reaching out for sympathy or perhaps reconciliation, but I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges stay burned. What I've learned through all of this, what I want anyone reading this to understand, is that you are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Family is not an excuse for abuse. Love should never require you to diminish yourself, and sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. The night Eleanor threw me out was the worst night of my life. But it was also, in a strange way, the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to finally see the truth I'd been avoiding for years. It pushed me to fight for myself and my daughter in a way I'd never fought before. It led me to Jake, to my career, to this life I love. I'm not grateful for the abuse. I'm not thankful for the years of pain, but I am proud of who I became in spite of it. I'm proud that I didn't let Eleanor's cruelty define me, that I refused to accept her assessment of my worth, that I built something beautiful from the ashes of what she tried to destroy. These days, I volunteer at a local women's shelter, helping others who are trying to escape toxic situations. I share my story when it's helpful, and I listen when that's what's needed. I've learned that healing isn't linear, that recovery takes time, that you have to be patient with yourself and others. Emily and I talk about that time in our lives sometimes, usually late at night when she's home from college and can't sleep. She remembers more than I wish she did, but she's processed it in a healthy way, thanks to years of therapy and the stable, loving home Jake and I created for her. She's writing her own music now, songs about resilience and strength and finding your voice. I cry every time I hear them, proud beyond measure of the woman she's becoming. Last month, Jake and I took Daniel to the park, the same one where we'd had our first picnic all those years ago. While Daniel played on the swings, Jake and I sat on our old blanket spot under the oak tree. The tree had grown taller, its branches reaching higher into the sky, much like we'd grown and reached for our own dreams. "Do you ever regret it?" Jake asked me. "Any of it?" The fight, the exposure, the years of struggle? I thought about it, really thought about it. Did I regret standing up for myself? Did I regret exposing Eleanor's crimes? Did I regret the hard years of rebuilding? Not for a second, I said. Every struggle led me here, to you, to this life, to becoming the person I was always meant to be. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Every single day, I'm proud of you. And that's the thing about surviving abuse and coming out the other side. You learn that the validation you spent years desperately seeking from the wrong people was inside you all along. You learn that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself. You learn that walking away from toxicity isn't giving up, it's standing up. I wish I could go back and tell that 32-year-old woman standing on the street corner with her suitcases that everything would be okay, that the pain she was feeling would transform her into someone stronger, that she'd find real love, build a real family, and create a life beyond her wildest dreams, that the people who threw her away would become irrelevant while she became extraordinary. But I can't go back. None of us can. All we can do is move forward, taking the lessons we've learned and using them to build something better. All we can do is refuse to let our worst moments define us, choosing instead to let them refine us. So here I am, 15 years after the worst night of my life, sitting under an oak tree with the man I love, watching our son play in the sunshine, knowing our daughter is out in the world chasing her dreams. I've published a book, helped countless others escape their own toxic situations, and built a career I'm passionate about. I've created a family based on love and respect rather than obligation and manipulation. Eleanor wanted to destroy me. Instead, she freed me. David wanted to see me fail. Instead, I succeeded beyond anything he could imagine. Richard wanted me to stay small and manageable. Instead, I grew into my full potential. They thought throwing me out would be my ending. They were wrong. It was my beginning. If you're reading this and you're trapped in a toxic situation, if you're being abused or manipulated or made to feel worthless, please hear me. You are not what they say you are. You are not a burden. You are not too much or not enough. You are valuable exactly as you are, and you deserve love that doesn't hurt. Leaving is terrifying. Rebuilding is exhausting. But staying in a situation that diminishes you is a different kind of death. A slow erosion of everything that makes you who you are. And you deserve better. You deserve so much better. I know because I lived it. I survived it. And if I can make it from that street corner to this park bench, from homelessness to homecoming, from victim to victor, then so can you. Your story doesn't end with their rejection. It begins there. Take it from someone who knows. The best revenge isn't carefully plotted exposure or legal victories, though those certainly have their place. The best revenge is living well. It's building a life so full of joy and love and purpose that the people who tried to break you become footnotes in your story, rather than the authors of it. Eleanor is gone now, and I feel nothing but relief that she can't hurt anyone else. David is irrelevant, still living in the shadow of the life they tried to steal from me. Richard is a cautionary tale, a man who chose weakness over strength and lost everything that mattered. And me? I'm happy. Genuinely, deeply, contentedly happy. I wake up every morning in a home filled with love. I go to work doing something that matters. I come home to a partner who sees me, really sees me, and loves what he sees. I watch my children grow and thrive, knowing they'll never experience the toxicity I endured. That's my revenge. That's my victory. Not their downfall, but my rise. Not their punishment, but my peace. Not their regret, but my redemption. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel is running toward us, laughing, his small face flushed with joy. Jake stands to catch him, swinging him up into his arms. I stand too, brushing grass from my jeans, and we walk together toward the car, a family, whole and healed and home. This is what was waiting on the other side of that closed door. This is what I gained by losing people who never truly valued me. This is the life Eleanor's rejection gave me permission to build, and I wouldn't change a single moment of it.